Peter B. Collins, News and Comment. It's Friday, May 3rd, 2019. It's International Press Freedom Day, and I will be observing it by participating in a rally in San Francisco in support of freedom of the press and Julian Assange. We'll be starting at 4 p.m. at the British Consulate located at number 1 Sansom Street, and we will rally there and then march down Market Street to the U.S. Federal Building. And it's Friday, and I don't know that many people will hear this podcast between now and 4 p.m., but I want to mention it. We do have some news about Julian Assange later in the podcast. But I open with two different challenges to the Mueller investigation. One, that it was unlawful, and the other, that it's incomplete. And first, to the unlawful part, I am not surprised that the White House lawyers, who are being paid by taxpayers to defend Donald Trump, have generated a pretty strong letter challenging the legal basis of the Mueller report. And this is a 5-page letter under the signature of Emmett T. Flood, Special Counsel to the President. And he notes that the conclusion on the question of obstruction of justice includes the idea that the special counsel found that he could not determine criminal conduct occurred. Now, in Mueller's investigation and in the report, he says that he didn't come to a conclusion because policy doesn't permit him to indict a sitting president. And Flood is not really addressing that issue. But he's saying that because there was no conclusive determination that this is a fundamental violation of Trump's right to a presumption of innocence, and that there is no legal basis to talk about exoneration related to obstruction of justice. Now, you may find these to be just, frivolous, litigious arguments. And they are. They are the work of an attorney feverishly trying to find a way to undermine the results of Mueller's investigation. And as you know, I find the obstruction part compelling, not so much the first part about Russian meddling. And Mr. Flood refers to Mueller's interpretation as an inverted burden of proof, knowingly embedded in Mueller's conclusion that shows that the special counsel and his staff failed in their duty to act as prosecutors and only prosecutors. So, Flood is taking a very narrow view of what Mueller was permitted to do. This is consistent with what Bill Barr said the other day, that once he recognized that he wasn't going to ever indict Trump no matter what, that Mueller should have rolled up his investigation. Now, I think that Rosenstein's drafting of the order to Mueller to begin the special counsel process was sufficiently broad that these claims are, they're speculative. Nevertheless, it will fuel the Republicans and the conservative echo chamber into saying, look, this is a bogus investigation. It's not based on the law. There's been all this hoo-ha about how Trump, is in violation of the rule of law. And therefore, this is something that can be discounted. Now, I think that this will be used to fuel what we see as Trump's growing aggressiveness and assertiveness in trying to establish his near-dictator powers, and that he is above the law and above the investigations of the Congress. But I think this is a very interesting salvo, and I note that the letter was released yesterday, and Rachel Maddow didn't have room to discuss it on her program last night. It's inconvenient to the narratives that she's been pushing. Now, the other big challenge to the Mueller report is one that I have been making for months now, that his work is incomplete. He didn't talk to Bill Binney, and it appears he didn't investigate the whole British wing of the Russiagate operation. And ever since last year, we learned who Stefan Halper is. After Gina Haspel at the CIA and others feverishly tried to block his being identified, his identity being disclosed. They said, they falsely protested, saying that this could undermine sources and methods. But what it really did is expose the extent to which the FBI was using Stefan Halper, and he is a guy who goes back to the Reagan era. He's been both a contractor to the Pentagon and an informant to the FBI. And we know that he met with George Papadopoulos after the Australian ambassador had reported that Papadopoulos was saying that he had Russian contacts who could cough up some of Hillary Clinton's emails. Now we know that Stefan Halper was not operating alone. The FBI dispatched a woman with the cover name Azra Turk. And she had drinks with George Papadopoulos, too. Mr. Papadopoulos described her as attractive. And he had several encounters with her. He did bolt on the last meeting that was held with Stefan Halper, after Halper was peppering him with questions about whether Russia was collaborating with the Trump campaign. So the surfacing of this woman, and once again, this is based on anonymous sources, leaked information, just like everything in the Russiagate narrative. We learned that based on the FBI's perspective, she was dispatched because of the level of alarm inside the FBI during a frantic period when the Bureau was trying to determine the scope of Russia's attempts to disrupt the 2016 election. And the second clause of that sentence is, but this could also give ammunition to Trump and his allies for their spying claims. Well, that's marginally honest by the New York Times, because I think that this is a very serious subplot in this telenovela. And the London operation, according to the Times, yielded no fruitful information. But as the Inspector General of the Justice Department, prompted by Bill Barr, Trump's lawyer, they've launched an investigation into the investigation. And I think they may turn up some very damaging evidence. I think this guy Halper is a key player, and he continued to troll the Trump campaign. He met with a group of White House advisors in 2017. For a moment, he was considered for a possible ambassadorship. And he used his position as an academic in Britain to introduce himself, and I would say ingratiate himself, to both Papadopoulos and Carter Page. These two low-level people. And when you now look back at the hysterical coverage, the claims of, hundreds of contacts between Trump people and Russians, this is another one that just, it dissolves in the face of close scrutiny and the evidence that we have today. And I will continue to probe on the Halper front. I think it could be quite intriguing. Neil Katyal is the attorney who was appointed by the Clinton administration, yes, Bill Clinton's administration in the late 90s, to rewrite the rules for special counsels after they allowed the independent counsel law to expire. And if you want a little positive, optimistic look, Neil Katyal is feeling real sunny about this. He says, I think the system is working, however slowly, toward justice. We are in the fifth inning. We should celebrate a system in which our own government can uncover so much evidence against a sitting president. The underappreciated story right now is that we've not only learned that it was Barr who decided to clear Trump of the obstruction charges, but we've also discovered the reasoning behind Barr's decision. The American public and Congress now have the facts and evidence before them. Barr tried to spin these facts. He hid Mueller's complaints even when Congress asked in a previous hearing about complaints by members of the special counsel's team. Katyal is correct that Barr does appear to have exposed himself to perjury charges by his inconsistent positions related to his knowledge of objections from Mueller and the team. Ray McGovern has some good comments at Consortium News today about the Senate hearing this Wednesday that remains largely evidence-free. He cites the exchange between Senator Kamala Harris of California and Barr, where Barr admitted that he didn't look at the evidence that was listed in the footnotes in the 450-page Mueller report. And so that means that he didn't look at the part that we're not allowed to see that purportedly establishes with evidence that Russia hacked the DNC and transferred the stolen materials to WikiLeaks. And Ray writes, during the entire Barr testimony Wednesday, no one departed from the safe conventional wisdom about Russian hacking. We in Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity at least resist the notion that this makes it true. We shall continue to insist that 2 and 2 is 4 and point out the flaws in any squishy intelligence community assessment that concludes that the required answer is 5. And then he takes us back to how James Clapper lied to us on the evidence of Iraqi weapons of mass destruction. And he says, for the moment, we shall have to live with the Russians still did it, whether Trump colluded or not. There remains an outside chance that the truth will emerge, perhaps even before November 2020, and that will establish that the Democrats have shot themselves in both feet. Those Democrats are extending the deadline for Bill Barr to cough up the entire report to the Judiciary Committee. There are also moves to get him to release the full report to every member of Congress. Right now, it's only available to the top 12, and they have to go to a secret room where they can't take notes out with them. And according to Rush Limbaugh, and he may be telling the truth about this, only 3 of the 12 people, all Republicans, have taken the opportunity to review the unredacted Mueller report. So that's a fight that's worth fighting. But will the Democrats take action against Bill Barr for lying? And will they confront the obstructive efforts of the Trump White House now, based in part on Emmett Flood's letter, where he warns that while they haven't asserted executive privilege in the past, they feel free to do so in the future, even in ways that seem quite dubious to me. And, for example, that relates to the efforts to get former White House counsel Don McGahn to testify before Congress. He doesn't work for Trump anymore, and the efforts to squash a subpoena could lead to a very interesting legal battle. And if executive privilege is asserted, it could delay any testimony by McGahn for months, if not a year. Interesting footnote to this, Don McGahn had a very capable chief of staff named Annie Donaldson. She is a loyal Republican. She now works for Luther Strange, the creepy interim senator from Alabama, who Roger Schuler at the Legal Schnauzer blog revealed to have had an affair, and that led to Schuler's incarceration behind bogus claims of libel or that sort of thing. And so that kind of defines her. But she was a very careful note taker. And every time Don McGahn had a meeting with Trump, he'd come out and she would jot down notes on what McGahn said he and the president had discussed. And she now fears that she and her notes may be subpoenaed to testify and become a part of another legal battle as the White House tries to block any testimony before Congress. Now, you may recall Carl Klein. He was the director of the White House Personnel Security Office. He overrode the insiders and granted top security clearances to people like Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump. And initially, the White House said that they would not permit him to testify. And he now works at the Pentagon, so nominally they have some hold over him. I don't find that to be compelling, but that's the kind of leverage that they have. Anyway, the White House relented and said, well, he can testify about general stuff, but not about specific cases. And all this was prompted by a subordinate named Tricia Newbold, who told the committee in March that he frequently overruled the recommendations of security specialists and that she kept a running list of 25 people whose clearances had initially been denied, but Klein overruled the objections and granted them. And it's clear there is friction between the former co-workers. Get this, Tricia Newbold she has a rare form of dwarfism, so she is a short person. And she alleged that a form of workplace discrimination took place when Klein would put documents that he didn't want her to see in the top drawer of a file cabinet, say, out of her reach, and he knew it. And so she now accuses him of lying to Congress, as that issue was aired out in his hearing yesterday. And Tom Steyer, the San Francisco lefty billionaire who has spent more than $50 million on TV ads calling for Trump's impeachment, he's now shifted his target, and his group is filing papers with the state bar in Virginia, where Bill Barr is a member of the bar. And I apologize for the excessive bars there, but it's irresistible. Now they want to disbar Barr. And that appears to be a very interesting, novel approach to penalizing him for his likely perjured testimony before the House this week. I'm sorry, it was the Senate. And so I don't know where that will go, but it gave me the chance to offend you with excessive bars. My San Francisco Chronicle surveyed all of the members of the House of Representatives who have districts in the Bay Area and asked them, what is your current position on impeachment? And while many of them pay lip service to the need to hold Trump accountable, they use squishy language. Here's one that's not too squishy. Mark DeSaulnier, who's an East Bay member of Congress. I support impeachment. I also believe we need to proceed with congressional investigations currently underway to get the truth to the American people. Anna Eshoo, she's a Pelosi loyalist from Palo Alto. As a member of Congress, I must be provided an unredacted copy of the special counsel's report, blah, blah, blah. Let's see. In order to make a decision as to whether the House moves to impeach the president or whether it's done the old-fashioned way, impeachment at the ballot box next year. Jared Huffman, who previously has made very clear calls for impeachment, in this quote is not quite as forthcoming. We should follow the facts. We should do this full-throated investigation. We should read the Constitution and remember our founders anticipated a moment like this, and they put the constitutional remedy of impeachment in the Congress for a reason. We can't just punt that. There's a real downside to that. He's backing into it there. Ro Khanna, the young upstart progressive who often impresses us. This is not a moment to rush to judgment, he said. Rather a time to be deliberate, methodical, and blah, blah, blah. Barbara Lee, outspoken African-American member from Oakland. She believes Trump must be held accountable, strongly supports congressional investigations, and believes that impeachment must not be taken off the table. Again, these are not calls for impeachment. It's just saying, well, don't take it off the table. And Barbara, I'm disappointed in you. Zoe Lofgren, a legal scholar. I don't know what the Congress and the public will think when we finish the entire review. I think it's a mistake to try and jump to a conclusion. Jackie Spear of San Mateo. The Mueller report was meant to inform Congress drafting of articles of impeachment. That's why the House must conduct its oversight and investigate the damning evidence uncovered by the report and any other evidence of crimes and corruption. She then reverts to impeaching the president at the ballot box in 2020. So that gives you a flavor. And, as you know, I find this a very weak posture by the Democrats, and they're dithering about this at the very moment that Trump is getting more aggressive. And if he gets a handle on this Stefan Halper wing of the Trump-Russia investigation, he could turn the tables here. I'm very concerned about that. And I don't try to make predictions too often about those sorts of things, but I have the concerns that I just expressed. So today, Trump had an hour-long call with Vladimir Putin. They are free at last, because there wasn't any goddamn collusion, according to Mueller. And they even talked about the Mueller investigation. When Trump tweeted about the call, as I have always said, long before the witch hunt started, getting along with Russia, China, and everyone is a good thing. Referring to Putin, we discussed trade, Venezuela, Ukraine, North Korea, nuclear arms control, and even the Russian hoax. Very productive talk. And Sarah Huckabee Sanders expanded. The conversation on that part was very quick. I can tell you is that this administration, unlike the previous one, takes election meddling seriously. And we're going to do everything we can to prevent it from happening. Yeah, they have it both ways. There was no meddling, but we will prevent it in the future. Brilliant, brilliant stuff. Every day I pause for a second to thank the people who support my work here at the Peter B. Collins Podcast with your contributions, your subscriptions. And the lead dog is Paul Elsesser, consistently a very generous supporter of this podcast. And he often sends emails of encouragement. Thank you, Paul. Then there's Terry Paris in Berkeley. On my sheet right here, she's got 2 different subscriptions, and I believe there are more. Ted Kelly, Janet Steele. I'm grateful to each of you. And I invite others to join the supportive process. Visit peterbcollins.com, click on menu, click on Become a Subscriber. On the sign-up page, you choose PayPal subscriptions, and you can choose the $50 annual, and I'll reward you with our bonus book, 2100 Dystopian Utopia, the blueprint for climate change adaptation. Should you like to avoid PayPal, just drop me a line in the U.S. mail. Box 150, 660, San Rafael, California, 94915. So today I'm releasing to my subscribers at iTunes, TuneIn, Spreaker, and Stitcher a fresh, in-depth interview with Stuart Wexler. Stuart is a longtime historian about white radical movements in this country. He's written books about the murder of Dr. King and the conspiracy of white nationalists to bring that off. And some of those same figures have a role in his latest analysis about the intersection of Christian identity followers. These are extreme Bible thumpers whose religion also includes hate for both African Americans and Jews. And Stu Wexler shows us the intersection of those who leaned toward the Klan or were former members, who shifted into the Christian identity movement, and the recent expressions of anti-Semitic violence in this country by Robert Bowers in Pittsburgh and last week by John Ernest in Poway, California. Here's an excerpt from my conversation with Stu Wexler.
Not at all, and I actually would assert a couple of things. One, I would be very surprised, having read his manifesto, if these radical Christians within his church weren't Christian identity. If you dig into the passages that Ernest quoted in his manifesto, I published in my book America's Secret Jihad the creed for the Christian identity folks, and it's heavily rooted in selectively quoting out of context certain passages in the Bible, both New and Old Testament, and he checked off almost every single one. We're talking 5 or 6, and that's incredibly rare. These aren't passages that are typically cited in any conventional Christian congregation, certainly not all of them together. But I would add something else, and this is something that hasn't been all that commonly reported. I don't know if it's been reported anywhere, about Mr. Bowers. Now, I don't know if he was himself fully immersed in Christian identity, but I'd be, again, incredibly surprised if he wasn't influenced by it for two reasons. The first is that the quote he actually had on his Twitter page, I think John844, is one of the most commonly cited passages by Christian identity folks. Now, by itself, it was also cited by, Nazis in Germany.
Mm-hmm.
But dig deeper into his Twitter feed, and he actually gives a screen print of the Christian identity Wikipedia page and gives his assent to it. He doesn't say it said something like, something that makes this much sense has to be right.
I hope you'll check out the complete interview with Stuart Wexler. We talk about how the Klan and other extremists embrace Christian identity. We talk about how COINTELPRO was aimed not just at the black nationalist groups, but also at the white extremist groups too, and that's what I learned from this interview. That's one of the reasons I do this, I get to talk to people who know much more than I do, and I've been covering COINTELPRO since 1973. So kudos to Stu Wexler on that. And be sure to listen to the final part of the podcast, where we talk about the trivial use of anti-Semitism when it's aimed at tweets by Ilhan Omar. And I make the case that nobody's ever died from a tweet, but the violent expression of anti-Semitism in Pittsburgh, in Poway, elsewhere, it ends up being just part of the noise when Zionists in particular cry wolf way too often. Here's the news about Julian Assange. The UN Working Group on Arbitrary Detention has called for him to be released from prison. He's being held at Britain's Supermax prison. They've criticized the British government for breaching his human rights. They're concerned by the disproportionate sentence imposed on Assange for violating the terms of his bail, which is described as a minor violation. Quote, the working group regrets that the government has not complied with its opinion and has now furthered the arbitrary deprivation of liberty for Assange. Continuing to quote, it is worth recalling that the detention and subsequent bail of Assange in the UK were connected to preliminary investigations initiated in 2010 by a prosecutor in Sweden. It's equally worth noting that the prosecutor didn't press any charges against Assange, and after interviewing him in 2017, she discontinued investigations and brought an end to the case. The working group is further concerned that Assange has been detained since April 11th in Belmarsh Prison, a high-security facility, as if he were convicted for a serious criminal offense. This treatment appears to contravene the principles of necessity and proportionality envisaged by the human rights standards. There's also a fresh report from Kevin Gostola at Shadowproof about the hearing on extradition held yesterday, and he adds some new details. A quote from one of the attorneys for Assange. Despite what you heard from the prosecutor in the courtroom today, this case is not about hacking. It is about a journalist and a publisher who had conversations with a source about accessing that material, encouraged that source to provide the material, and spoke to that source about how to protect their identity. This is protected activity that journalists engage in all the time, and any prosecution and extradition of Assange for having done so or alleged to have done so will place a massive chill on investigative journalism the world over. Very well said. Here in Silicon Valley, Facebook, under pressure, has announced a new censorship effort, and they booted some high-profile antagonists from the site, including Alex Jones, Milo Yiannopoulos, Louis Farrakhan of the Nation of Islam. And as you know, I don't have any particular affinity for any of these individuals. But I completely support their First Amendment right to be heard. And this is a truly deplorable move on the part of Facebook, which is now shifting its focus from a kind of town hall to just sharing pictures of your pets. and your brunch. That's a mistake. The Embassy of Spain in Caracas, Venezuela, is harboring Leopoldo Lopez, who is the real leader of the effort to force Nicolas Maduro from the presidency. And they have not granted him asylum. Apparently, that can only be determined if Lopez goes to Spain, which is that's his heritage, his ethnic heritage. And so he is being treated as a guest. But today he held a news conference on the steps of the embassy, which produced a backlash from the Maduro government, and the Spanish foreign minister decreed that the compound will not be used as a center for political activities. So it's kind of like Assange in the last stage. And I didn't know this, that initially Lopez ran to the embassy of Chile and then moved to the Spanish embassy. And Chile is harboring an opposition politician named Freddy Guevara, who's been living there since 2017. There's also a good piece of Mint Press News today under the byline of Whitney Webb. She spoke to a number of American peace activists, and they warn Juan Guaido, the would-be instant president of Venezuela, that he may be of more value to the CIA as a martyr than as a future leader. Because of the failure of the coup attempt this week, the speculation is that his sell-by date has been reached, and the concern is that he could become a target for a false flag attack that would then become the pretext for further action, including a military invasion by the U.S. And once again, I point out, there is precious little opposition or dissent here in the United States. The mayor of Baltimore has stepped down. She published a bunch of kids' books, and corporate cronies bought books by the boxload. In one transaction, she picked up $100,000 for selling copies of her children's books. And it's really tragic. Baltimore is such a beautiful city with a lot of great people, and it's just been hammered by scandal after scandal. And she was the one who was going to fix it all. Finally, today, I want to make a plug for one of my pet bands these days, prompted by a review in The Guardian. And the group is called The National. You may never have heard of them. They've been around for 20 years. It's a pair of brothers and another guy. And the two pairs of brothers came from my hometown of Cincinnati, Ohio. And I love their music. It's an original sound. It's kind of dark and brooding. And the lead singer has a really beautiful baritone voice that he deploys to great effect. And the lead singer is Matt Berninger, who is a very talented guy. So I put up a link to the YouTube page where you can hear all of the National's material, including a new album, at least some new tracks from a new album called I Am Easy to Find, which is due out in about 2 weeks. I'd love to play you a tune, but YouTube won't let me. So click on YouTube, and you can check them out at your convenience. Thanks for listening to my daily news and comment podcast. You'll find it on YouTube. That's why I have to comply with their rules. I'm Peter B.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails to you. Keep smiling